Well, my main man is back. Christian Brune had dropped this kind of out of nowhere. I didn't even see any kind of a lead up to this. So I'm really excited. And when an album comes out of nowhere like this, I'm like, ooh, all right, let's see what we've got. So yeah, let's dive into this one. Logica by Inventions. So Inventions is Christian Brune's kind of side project, and I guess Christian Brune needs a little bit more introduction because I know he's not as well known as some other artists. He's one of my favorite artists of all time. He has done so many masterful albums, not only with himself as a solo project artist, but also within other bands. Like I know he was in Moya's orchestra, and he was in, I believe it was either Nine Stones Closed or Fallen Leaves or something like that. So he's been in a number of different projects as well as his own solo stuff. He orchestrated this Goliath of a project called the Black Codex, which was an incremental episodic work where every week or every month you would get a new song, and it was kind of like a before Patreon kind of a thing. And now he's kind of taking that same page and applied it to this Inventions. So with that, it was, every month or every other week, I think it was, he would release a song, and after enough songs were written, he would then release a full-length album. So he released his first one, which was Meta, which was good. Like, there were some really nice tracks on there, and then he also released Curiosity, I believe last year or the year before. And again, these kind of conglomerated a number of works that he had already released. Now, I actually like two of his albums that he did outside of these, and that was, I believe it was City Lights, or The City of Lights. And the one that I believe is his complete masterpiece is Days of Summer Gone. Just brilliant work. So now we come into Logica, and it's interesting. It's being kind of labeled as an EP or a single, but really it's a full-length album. There are 7 songs, and it makes up enough runtime for me to be a solid album. And I think I like this the most out of all of his Inventions projects. It has much more of a unique and unifying feel to it compared to his other ones. Like his other 2 albums that he's done with the Invention series felt much more like an experimentation. It felt much more of like, well, let's see if we can do this kind of thing. So it was much more of like a collection of songs that have been put on an album. Whereas this feels like a cohesive album that had a clear outline from the get-go of what do I want to accomplish? What do I want to see done? I want to get rid of this right at the beginning. One of the criticisms that I'll have on this album is that all the songs do feel very, very similar. Best phrase that I can kind of come up with is it might be a one-trick pony. There's a lot of subtleties, there's a lot of atmosphere, there's a lot of build-ups towards a final grand finale within most of these songs, and it does follow suit very heavily to a lot of the sounds that Christian has already discovered in past albums. That's the only real criticism that I can find. The songs do feel very similar. There isn't a whole lot of deviation from the mean, and that's not necessarily, when you kind of take a step back and analyze the album, that's not necessarily a bad thing because it does unify the album. But it does kind of provide a little bit of like almost a crutch. It does provide, again, that one-trick pony kind of an aspect, because, I mean, that one trick is amazing. Like, I love that. But at the same time, you're like, okay, so each song kind of does feel the same way. But let's actually talk about some of the nitty-gritties about this album, because there's quite a bit to talk about. The overall structure was really good, but I will say that it suffered the same thing that a lot of albums this year are suffering from, and that's the best part of the album is right at the beginning. The first 2 tracks of Platonics and Logica are the best tracks. Platonics is a great way of opening it up with this very big build. It reminds me of how Cirque du Soleil sometimes will open up an album with this very big encouragement. There's a lot of like pump up and go kind of an aspect to it. It's very optimistic. It almost feels like a motivational poster, even though Platonics is strictly instrumental. And then it flows right into Logica, which is the longest track by far, which is like 15.25 minutes. This song, I freaking love Logica. Within the 15-minute runtime, I'm never bored. The song never gets stale. It never gets dull. It's always kind of shifting, but never too quickly. Like, Christian knows how much time is needed in each passage so that you're not feeling all that rushed, and you're not feeling all that bored either. Each movement takes exactly the amount of time that is needed for those movements. I love the kind of midpoint where there's that really great build. It does reminisce a little bit of like Steven Wilson's The Raven That Refused to Sing album. In that, like, it does remind me of like The Holy Drinker or The Watchmaker. In some of those builds that are presented on that album, it's felt very much so on here as well. Especially, we have this really interesting sound. It then blends into like a saxophone. And that was something that I hadn't seen on Christian's work before. It's like this saxophone sound, which was really interesting. I love that climax when everything comes back together at the end of the track. And it unifies the journey. I mean, this is the beginning. And it does kind of bring me down a little bit that this was the beginning, because as I've mentioned with a couple of the other albums that I talked about this year, where the best track is at the beginning, I almost think, well, what's the point of continuing on when the best part is right at the beginning? Now, luckily, there's still quite a number of really, really great moments. It never quite reaches that same peak that the climax of Logica does, but there is a number of really, really great moments on this album as a whole. And the one thing I want to just praise all the things for is Christian's drumming work. I mean, he is the percussionist in a lot of these other bands that I've mentioned for, so rhythm is very important. And I felt like within Logica, as well as within the fourth track of Beholder's Eyes, this is where he's really starting to stretch his legs in terms of a percussionist and as a drummer. The ending part, like right about the 6-minute mark of the 7-minute song, he just kind of explodes on the drums. And this, I had never heard him perform this well within the drumming before. Most of the time, the drumming is just kind of the background. It's just providing that rhythm, and it doesn't really take center stage. And within Beholder's Eyes, this is where that drumming really comes in, and it's so masterfully done. It does feel like he is stretching just a little bit. It doesn't feel 100% organic as other drummers who have done this style of drumming have before, but it does kind of take a step outside of his comfort zone, and I applaud him for doing that. I will also recommend perhaps trying a little bit more flourishes within that, because he does kind of hunker down and he does kind of stick the landing, but he doesn't really do a whole lot of flourishes, right? Now that he's kind of taken that first step, I'm excited to see the next couple of steps. And Beholder's Eyes does another great thing of, reintroducing that theme of this album of, the big climaxes, the big builds that I love, and the optimistic sounds. Again, this is a perfect example of that motivational poster found in music without being completely over the top of, you can do it there, champ, don't worry, the world's crap, but we can do it together. Because that's not the theme of this album. I haven't actually talked about the theme of this album. The theme of this album is very much of like the interplay between logic, our reality, and our minds, and it's very philosophical in that sense, because it does feel very much like a second-year university philosophy student kind of sitting you down and being like, man, reality is just numbers, and numbers influence reality, and reality is preserved by the mind. And the mind is dictated and invented with the numbers. And it's all cyclical, man. Like, it's all tied together. And, I mean, it's fun to do those kind of thought experiments, but if you're not quite along for the ride whenever you have this, it is kind of like, okay, that's nice. And this was really touched upon the 3 worlds and 3 mysteries, because the entire album is tied together with this voiceover, and the voiceover was used in his past Inventions work, so I do like that unifying theme there. But the overall unifying concept of this is like there's 3 real driving forces within reality, right? We've got the mind, which perceives reality. We have reality, which is slightly dictated by the mathematical equations, the mathematical rules, and those rules were observed and kind of created by the mind. And so how each one interplays between the next. And I do kind of enjoy that kind of thought experiment, and I like the fact that the music here does represent that without being too math rocky, without being too overly complex, because you could have totally taken it into that direction. But this is much more of like that euphoric epiphany moment of that eureka, I've got it, and it's that kind of discovery moment, and the music on here definitely reflects that. And I will also say I do enjoy the structure of this album, like in terms of like the songs, because there's a lot of very somber and very like smaller moments on here, which do allow for those really big moments that are found on here to really shine, because it's the contrast between the two. And songs such as The Mind's Eye, The Three Words, and Citadels do provide those smaller moments for us to appreciate the bigger times. And the ending of this album is fine with The Sum of All Things. I do feel like it does land a little bit flat, though. I mean, the final build is fine. It just doesn't really reach anything. It is more of the climb than the actual... I was kind of wishing that it ended much like Logica, in the fact that, like, Logica was starting at the base, looking up, being like, damn, that's a big climb, climbing and experiencing the climb, and then perching yourself on the top of the mountain and then gazing out towards the entire landscape. Whereas The Sum of All Things is strictly just a climb. We don't really get a moment of that respite of being on the top of the mountain and just having a graze look of all the things that have come before, which is kind of the whole thesis of the song, because it's also the ending of the album. So it would have been good to kind of tie everything back together with this kind of a really big crescendo of sound that I know Christian's able to do. And even just stretching this into maybe another 2 minutes of like that big final climax. So I mean, overall, I was very pleased with this. I think this is his strongest work of the Inventions series, and one that I highly recommend to check out. This album also isn't perfect by any means, but it is a great time, and I have no problem picking this up in physical format if I could. And that's about it. That's it for Logica by Inventions, helmed by Christian Brune. What did you guys think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? I strongly recommend going out and finding this, because this is something that progressive rock desperately needs. We get a lot of these grand, big noises, but they're always in the minor key. They're always very depressive, and this is something that's very celebratory, and we're really needing that right now. We need some happy songs, and I'm glad that at least Christian is still doing something like that. So please go out and listen to it. Highly recommended. Great job. And that's about it. So thank you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.